Hello and welcome to the Microbiomedics podcast. I'm Dr. Siobhan McCormack.
And I'm Dr. Sheena Fraser, and we're your co-hosts.
We are both GPs and lifestyle medics with a shared passion for microbiome science. And we have spent the last 5 years deep diving into the world of the gut microbiome. We'll be translating the evidence and packaging it into actionable, bite-sized chunks so that you can harness the power of the microbiome to improve your own health and that of your patients.
Just before we start this interview, we'd like to remind our listeners to take a look at the Gut Microbiome for Clinicians course. It's available through bslm.org.uk. It's a comprehensive course on the gut microbiome which takes you from the basics to the clinical application of this fascinating new area of medicine. This course will empower you to use microbiome science in your daily practice.
Hello and welcome to the Microbiomedics podcast. I'm Dr. Sheena Fraser. And I'm joined today with Dr. Siobhan McCormack, finally, because we haven't actually done a podcast together for a little while this year. And it's really nice to suddenly be able to do this because we're both in Newcastle for the BSLM conference this year. So, Siobhan, how are you?
I am so good. It's great to see you. And it is great to be in the same place and not be meeting virtually. And I guess we're both really buzzed up about this conference. So it's the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine Conference. It happens every year. It is the best event on the calendar. And this year they've arranged it in the Sage in Gateshead. So this beautiful building right near the Millennium Bridge and all these beautiful bridges in Newcastle. I've never been to Newcastle before. It has been brilliant sunshine every day. I mean, seriously, people are walking around in T-shirts and shorts. It's September. I'm kind of, I think the people from Newcastle are a bit shocked as well. They said it normally happens, but we're very, very happy. And there's a huge buzz in the air. There's all these brilliant lifestyle medics who are just full of ideas and enthusiasm. There's just all these brilliant talks. And I suppose my only criticism would be there's just too many wonderful people to talk to and too many great talks to go to.
Yeah, it's quite overwhelming. I think, it's a 3-day conference, which is a lot anyway, but then you've got the fact that there are talks running side by side, and sometimes it's really difficult to know which ones to go to. But it's fantastic. I mean, as you say, really inspirational speakers and such a variety of speakers on so many different topics, all kind of related in some way to lifestyle medicine. And it's just really inspirational. I mean, there are some incredible people out there, not just from the UK, from all around the world that come to this conference, and they're doing incredible things. So what's been your favourite bit of the conference from yesterday, Siobhan?
Well, it's just, I suppose I was going to say on top of that, so you've got 2 big rooms where there's these amazing talk happens, but then the magic happens in those outer rooms, and I haven't really had time so far to explore those, where you get these small rooms with people just talking about what they're doing locally, and that's where the magic happens. So the big rooms is the scientists presenting the research and big, important, wonderful people, but they're talking about, the bigger issues and at government level, but it's the ground root stuff that we all love when you hear about someone setting up something locally for some kids or, disadvantaged teenagers or people with learning difficulties, and that is where the magic is. So we're on day 2. So let's go back to day 1. What did I like? Do you know what? I loved all the talks, but my head was spinning, and my little haven yesterday was going to a session by Vidyamala Birch, who runs Breathworks, this incredible organisation, and she looks at mindful meditation, and that's in chronic pain, anxiety, but all sorts of other conditions. And she's just got this incredible community of people. And so we went into a room and she just said we could sit and lie. And it was just 15 minutes of her voice and a mindfulness experience. And just at the end of it, I felt really chilled. And I thought that was brilliant. What about you?
Yeah, it sounds like that was needed. In fact, I could have done with that today, because I have to say it was quite overstimulating by the end of today, because there's so many people. And as you say, it's not just the main sessions and the main lecture theatres where all the magic is happening. Actually, just networking with everybody. And, now that we've been attending BSLM for so many years, we've built this huge network of doctors and nutritionists and yoga teachers and, all these incredible people that come along to this conference that we've befriended over the years, who we network with, who we try and work with. And these are incredible people, and just catching up with them is wonderful. My highlight from yesterday was this incredible bunch of teenagers who are calling themselves Bite Back.
Oh yeah,
that was an incredible talk. I mean, it was amazing because, two teenagers, one 15 and one 17, stood up on this enormous stage in this massive lecture theatre and were so confident in front of everybody, which I was in awe of, because I struggled with that anxiety on stage myself. But their topic is incredible. So essentially, they are representatives of this group Bite Back, who are taking on the big processed food companies. And they are essentially saying, we don't want processed food in our lives. And they're trying to tackle it at the level of these big food companies, and taking, complaining to them about all the advertising, the fact that they can't go online without being bombarded with processed food adverts. They can't walk down the street without being bombarded with fast food adverts. Everywhere they go in life, it's everywhere. And it's incredibly difficult for them to navigate the food system when it's all pointing towards ultra-processed food. And they want to maintain their health. They don't want to get sick on processed food. And I just thought this was an incredible organisation, and I'd never heard of them. Had you?
No, and it's also, again, and we'll go on to, what our talk was about, this idea of teenage stereotypes that we get, they like ultra-processed food rather than processed food. They like ultra-processed food, that's what they like, that's what they want. But they put up some statistics saying that 80% of adolescents want to eat less of this stuff. They know it's not great, but they struggle. It's addictive, it's hyperpalatable, it's everywhere, and it's what their peers eat, so they'll stand out if they don't eat it. And actually, they don't want to be eating it, but they do, like us, because it's there, and, it's quite difficult to navigate life without it. But the assumption that we have is, to have this incredible group say, no, we've got our own voice, thank you very much. We don't need you to advocate for us. We don't want this stuff in our life. And it's you guys who's put it there, know. And it's very powerful, great imagery, poet, a bit of, lovely slides. And actually, I think everyone learnt a lot from how to communicate a message. They were feisty, they were angry, and they were powerful. Yeah,
they were. I mean, they got a standing ovation. Everybody was affected by that talk. Everybody was talking about it afterwards. I mean, I think that's exactly what we need with the fast food industry and the processed food industry, because at the end of the day, it's so much more powerful when it comes from the teenagers, because they are the ones that are going to be living their entire lives bombarded with this type of food environment. And, if they don't say it, then it's not as effective coming from us, because we're always told that they want it. So this is, I think this is exactly what's needed, and I would, I'm going to encourage my teenagers to get involved. It's certainly something that I think is really an amazing organisation. So look them up, everybody, because they're amazing.
There is one other thing I would say, which you've alluded to, which is this is an organisation that kind of us and adults need to stay away from. It's cool, it's beautifully designed, it's about them, for them, and it needs to go from adolescent to adolescent if we start kind of getting involved. But anyone listening who's got, adolescents, teenagers, young people who, are fed up with, us adults moaning about ultra-processed food, actually this is an organisation that I think they will be interested in, because it's got that kind of cool, rebellious, arty feel. So look them up.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. So we just had another day. We're on day 2. What was your highlight from today, Siobhan?
Well, today, I really struggled today because Sheena and I did a talk today, which we'll tell you about later. But I was weirdly nervous. And that's when you're talking about those teenagers standing up like it was nothing. So I couldn't sleep last night. And I have to have my sleep. It's a big lifestyle thing. I actually didn't sleep, a wink last night. And I sleep 9 hours. I need 9 hours. So I was kind of feeling a bit ropey anyway. But amazingly enough, I was awake anyway. And that's the thing about this conference. 7 a.m. I went to a yoga session. So there's this brilliant organisation called the Yoga Health Association Alliance, the Yoga Health Alliance. I mustn't get that wrong. So one of the leaders of it, Paul Fox, was doing a session today. So that's what I love about this conference. So I'm going in, and then I had to get out of the way on the way in. There was a running group going one way, and then there was Daryl Edwards doing his primal. I mean, what conference do you go to where 7 in the morning and you go in, there's people giving you coffee and tea and saying hi? It really is the most astonishing experience.
Yeah.
So I go to this yoga session, and there's a few chairs, and I think, I do quite a bit of yoga, and I think, yoga and chairs, really? It was amazing. And it was really nice to be led by Paul, because he explained that if you put chairs out, then there isn't any sense. It makes it much more available to everyone. Because even if people aren't in wheelchairs, there's lots of people who've never done yoga, or they've got back problems, and actually they know what to do with a chair. So they sit on a chair and they immediately feel grounded and not different from everyone else. And there is... Anyway, I was really amazed by the stretches and stuff you can do on a chair. Yeah. And then you were invited to lie down. But I thought, no, I'm staying here. This is great. So that was really interesting. And he was also saying, because they're trying to bring it into NHS clinics for healthcare workers as well, that actually what you want to do is break down all the barriers. You don't have to be looking in a particular way, wearing a particular thing. And when people say yoga, it immediately sort of stereotypes a particular class and type of person, that you have to be able to stand in your head and do something ridiculous. So that was really grounding and nice. So we all kind of sat in these chairs, and he's just got a lovely voice and a beautiful way about it. I mean, he's been an expert teacher for 30 years. So, but the stretches and the stuff that you do on a chair, he was pointing out that you could do this for 5 minutes between patients. And then he showed us what you could do against a desk. And this was not like, each thing you do was really, really, stretching and pulling, and absolutely brilliant. So that was a real lesson for me, because I thought that you sat in a chair if you couldn't do it, inverted commas.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now I'm thinking no, and I'm thinking actually much better to start there. And actually then everyone goes, okay, this is not as intimidating as I thought. What, you just want me to sit on a chair? I can do that. So, so that was
amazing.
Magical. So that was half an hour, and then came back and I had breakfast with Sheena. I mean, this is lovely having all this time. We're staying in the same accommodation. And it's great. So what about you? So that kind of, I really enjoyed that today. What about you today?
Fantastic. Yeah. So for me, I went to our friend George Ampat's talk. So George, in case nobody knows or has heard of George, is an orthopedic surgeon, although he calls himself an orthopedic physician these days.
Oh, right.
So George works in Liverpool, and he's been a big part of BSLM for many years now. And he's incredibly entertaining. He's a brilliant person to go and listen to, because his talks are very inspiring, and he's just got a brilliant way of presenting things so that you're always entertained and you're kept alert. There's no falling asleep in his talks. But he's always got an incredible message. So last year his talk was on spines and spinal surgery, and how we're probably doing too much spinal surgery, and that we can manage with lifestyle medicine back problems and back injuries incredibly well. This year he actually made his talk on knees and knee surgery and other options with it, and his points were quite interesting, because first of all he was making the point that when you have osteoarthritis of the knee, it's not just affecting the joint. It's actually affecting all of the other tissues around the joint, including all the musculature and the tendons and the ligaments around the joint, and you get erosion and damage to all of these things. But that this degeneration within the joint is actually something that worsens with inactivity. It worsens with overactivity, but you're talking more extreme overactivity, not your average runner or your average fitness fanatic, but it's really sort of extreme sports that cause damage to joints. It's when you take too much load through a joint and you can't continually repair that joint that you run into trouble. So it's really only the sort of ultra marathon runners and the real athletes that get more erosion to their joints. So that was interesting for me. I knew that the average runner shouldn't get shouldn't get arthritis, and that, if you're keeping yourself exercised, it's a really good preventer for arthritis. But I wasn't aware that that it was all to do with the amount of load on the joint. So that was interesting. But he was also making the point that on the run up to surgery, so if you took the average, an average of 100 patients on the run up to surgery for knee replacement with their osteoarthritis, if they're very inactive, then they're in a pretty poor state by the time they reach their surgery time. And of course, their muscles have degenerated more, their knees have degenerated more. And rehabilitating afterwards is much, much harder for them because they then don't have the strong musculature. So that makes an awful lot of sense. But if you introduce exercise programs for people on waiting lists for osteoarthritis knee replacements, you can actually repair a lot of the damage in the knee. And what he was finding is that exercise programs for these patients that are on waiting lists for knee surgery, actually, by the time the people got to knee surgery, 40% of them didn't require the surgery anymore.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's been repeated across several different studies across the world, which I found really fascinating, that you can reverse some of that arthritis to such a degree that you no longer need the surgery or no longer need it for several more years. So he's making the point that, we need to be much more proactive with these individuals awaiting surgery. And that makes an awful lot of sense because, it's bad for them, not just for their joints, but it's bad for them as a whole to be sedentary. And we know that it's bad for the microbiome to be sedentary. So yeah, I thought he made a really good point in his in his talk today, and he's a great guy to listen to. So George, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for that.
I mean, that's interesting because there were a couple of talks about sort of lifestyle medicine, preparing for operations and recovering from operations. Because in the NHS, you sit in this waiting list, and then suddenly the day comes for your operation, you have it, and then you get sent home. But there's so much preparation that you can do with lifestyle medicine that will, improve your anxiety about the procedure. Will it improve your health, your gut health? Your muscular tone and strength and your immune system, and make you much fitter for this really traumatic event. Yeah. Not only that, you'll recover better from the anaesthetic. You'll need less painkillers. There'll be less inflammation. The wound healing is known to be, reduced, and you're up and about quicker. So we're wasting waiting list time when we could be using that to do this kind of, prehab and rehab afterwards. And that's the sort of thing that the NHS hasn't focused on. And there was quite a few talks on that. And interestingly, another thing that happens in this conference, you have the talks, you have these rooms, you have lots of wonderful people, but you just have these lovely conversations with people who you might never meet again. And I was talking to someone, a plastic surgeon, about this is what she did. She did reconstruction post breast cancer reconstructions. And she said she just goes in and says, my patients aren't eating this food. You have to have this, it's plant-based and not ultra-processed food. And everyone was going, none of the other surgeons want that. And she said, these are my patients. This is my watch. They're not eating that on my watch. And I love that. Not on my watch. Wow. And she said, they know what I'm like and they like it because I say, I want you to have the best chance of, and she said, I only have a few days with them. She said, I'm hoping that even for the short time they're in hospital, that messaging will be, wow, my surgeon thought it was so important that she said, no, they have this afterwards. This is the way they eat. This is how I want them to move, get them up. And I just thought, I like that, not on my watch. So even though she knew that she couldn't be there when they got home, she thought, no, they deserve that. That was the implication. They deserve that. Their bodies deserve that. I know it improves their wound healing.
Absolutely.
And I thought, you meet these incredible people and then they're gone. And then you just think, well, it's very influential.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the last podcast that I did with the microbiome scientist that's studying wound healing. And that's exactly, what she was saying, that if you have a good microbiome, a good skin microbiome, and that is largely developed by having a good lifestyle and a good diet, then that actually makes a big difference to your wound healing. So your plastic surgeon is spot on. And if we could get more of the consultants out there interested in their patients' gut health and the importance of maintaining that whilst they're in hospital, I think that messaging could definitely filter down to the hospital caterers and, the people that are responsible for the food system and within the hospital, because, it doesn't take much. I read a statistic that it's only within 2 or 3 days that the gut microbiome develops quite severe dysbiosis on entry into the hospital. And that's multifactorial, of course. It's not just the food, it's the environment, it's the lack of sleep, it's the antibiotics, and the noise, and the stress. There's a whole host of reasons why your microbiome is taking a huge hit when you enter into the hospital environment. And of course, the hospital environment is surrounded with quite harmful microorganisms, the ones that can survive the alcohol rubs and all the hygiene measures that are going on in hospitals. So this is why people are more inclined to catch infections in hospital when they have a prolonged stay. And so again, if you go into hospital and you already made great strides to get your gut into good shape before your operation or, before you go into the hospital environment, then hopefully you won't get such a drop in function of your microbiome whilst you're in. And as you say, if we can protect the environment while they're in and really help their gut health as an inpatient, I think that would be incredible for outcomes.
Yeah. I want to pick up one point you said about messaging and being an influencer, which we think is something young people do online. But actually, being the surgeon is incredibly influential. If your surgeon says that, like, George Ampert saying, I don't want you to have surgery. I'm a surgeon, but I don't want you to have surgery. This lifestyle medicine is what we should do as the foundation, and then we'll see where it goes. If you get those really influential people in these positions of trust, I don't know if they understand how important that messaging is. And then going back to the conference, this conference, one thing I have to say is the food's great. It's nothing fancy. We're not fine dining, but it's just good, plant-based, nutritious food, not ultra-processed. And, sit around tables and then they've got plenty of breaks, plenty of fruit and veg. And it's that may sound like, why am I even talking about this? The reason I'm mentioning this is because the NHS, when you go to conferences, when you go to meetings, it's all ultra-processed food. Now, we now know that this affects multiple aspects of our health and is strongly associated with negative outcomes for, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. It's, the evidence is just a massive, array of evidence. And yet we haven't caught up. It's so strange. And I often think, all of us, will have to go to the dentist. When you go to the dentist, you walk into a room, you don't expect to see a vending machine. You don't expect someone to say, here's a lollipop, well done for not getting upset when you saw the dentist. We'd all be outraged. Everyone would think that was ridiculous and a bit of a joke. You know that your dentist has got good dental hygiene and they don't have sweets and they advise you about that. And we want that and we accept that. And yet when we go into hospitals, or schools or prisons or, government buildings, there are vending machines and ultra-processed food. It's strange, isn't it?
Everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand it either. And yes, I agree with you on the meeting front. And it's daft because if you're attending a meeting, a whole day meeting, and you eat ultra-processed food at lunchtime, well, I don't know what you're like, but I will definitely be falling asleep an hour or so after that because my sugar levels will plummet after an hour or so of later from eating ultra-processed food. So my concentration is going to be terrible. I'm not going to take in the talks in the afternoon, whereas I have to say at this conference, although we're exhausted and slightly overstimulated, we're not exhausted from the food.
Yeah. And you know what? We have, in fact, I think we should put the agenda at the end so people can see, because, hopefully people out there will be listening, be thinking, wow, there's doctors who are going to a lifestyle medicine conference, paying off their own bag. It's not because we have to do it, guys. This is because we absolutely love and believe this stuff. It's incredible, the potency of this. So we have travelled from all over the country to meet here because we believe that this is, the foundations of everyone's health and well-being. It's just, amazing what we're going to be able to do with this, all these ideas that people have are just so, the outcome measures and things are so, really, really exciting. But lots of the people who come from, we have lots of eminent talkers and professors, and they all say the food is amazing. Everyone's so nice.
Yeah.
I love this conference.
Yeah. They all say it.
I mean, mostly when you go to a diabetes conference, or you're knackered and you go home, but everyone they fall in love with this conference. And I've noticed that there are several professors who kind of come now every year, those eminent retired professors who are wonderful speakers, and they kind of fall in love with medicine again, and they want to kind of keep going, and they realize this is where they can put their energy.
Yeah.
And
it's not a small conference. I mean, over 1,000 in-person delegates today, and many more online that are here
it's massive.
Watching this. It's incredible.
Traction. Yeah, absolutely. So what else about today? Oh, wow. Do you know what? Before we talk about our talk, I want to just take a little moment to talk about Michael Mosley.
Yeah.
It just makes me really sad still. So he was, you guys know that he sadly passed away recently, and it was really nice because he is, absolutely sort of
pioneer
lifestyle. I mean, years ago, he always gets to everything about 5 or 10 years before everyone else does. He's incredible. But there was a lovely talk today. He was meant to be presenting at our conference, and we were all incredibly excited about it, and absolutely, devastated for him and family. And it's just really, really sad. But it was a lovely opportunity for Professor Taylor, who is the professor from Newcastle, who was a very good friend of Michael Mosley's, Professor Taylor did the direct study reversal of diabetes. So they did a lot of talks together. And he was a little bit forlorn on the stage, wasn't he? Because he said they used to do this kind of double act, and there was really lovely memories. But it was all about his communication skills and his kind of, his ability. And then they showed this lovely bit when he was on Loose Women. I don't know if you guys watch Loose Women, but if you go in there, you're going into the lion's den. But he was lovely and charming and taught everyone so much. And I thought that was lovely. And in fact, his book on the gut microbiome is so easy to read. And that's the one I recommend to people when they say, what's an easy read?
Absolutely.
But it's still bang up to date. It's so easy to read. And yet it's so research-based, and it still blows me away how he manages to be so readable and accessible, and his narrative style is fantastic, and
That's
is sorely missed. And there was a few tears shed today. Very sad loss.
Yeah, it was a really moving piece that they did on Michael, and yes, I think we were all devastated that he couldn't make the conference. And yeah, it was lovely to hear from Sir Roy Taylor, and just to hear about what he was like to work with, and to hear that other side of him. He was obviously so well respected by his colleagues as well as everybody who watched him, and managed to, if they were fortunate enough to meet him or be a part of his life. So I think
standing ovation, and it was
superb,
there was a lot.
superb.
There was so much love in the room.
Yeah, there really was.
Because a lot of us started in this area, with his books and it was this idea that, rather than waiting for the NHS to catch up, I still, pass people his book on, diabetes reversal.
Absolutely. He's also got a brilliant book on sleep as well.
Yeah.
Because I've read that one, and it's excellent. I mean, again, it's just the way he communicates, isn't it? It's a very easy book to read because it's full of stories. Yeah. He tells you lots of stories, and I love stories. That's how I learn best.
Yeah. He does stories about people, but he always has his own story. I'm a terrible sleeper, or I do this, or I need to, and he reversed his pre-diabetes. Yeah, so that was excellent.
Yeah. So we should talk about our talk.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to go into a little bit of detail on what we presented today, and why we did it, really, for the listeners and the people that can't be at the conference, so that you can learn a little bit about the teen gut-brain axis. So this is what we chose because the theme of the conference this year was start well, live well, and age well, and really focusing on health through the ages. So we decided to focus on teenagers.
Yes, we just sort of felt that they were kind of, often missed and overlooked and seen as quite sort of, difficult. But it's such an incredible window of opportunity. So you can either say, oh, well, wait, leave it. But, we will sort of discuss what's happening in their brains. It's just incredible hormonal tsunami, but that's not all. There's just incredible things happening all over the body. And it's the most important time to be receiving proper nourishment. And yet it's the time when, often they're eating the worst food. But yeah, so it was interesting. And there's a lot in medical literature at the moment about public participation. So this idea, which is quite right, that the BMJ really try and push, that when you're doing a talk or when you're discussing a group of people, you've got to involve them and you've got to say, well, look, what do they think and how can we do the talk around that? So we kind of a bit mindful. And I have to say, I didn't do it in a kind of really, high-end research way, but there were just a few teenagers hanging around my brother's house. There were 5 of them. And I just kind of got them to have a look at, chat through and have a look at some of our PowerPoints, which were quite nerdy, I guess, and quite research-based. And they were funny, but they were going, oh, it's like, there's too many words, there's not enough pictures, oh, it's da, 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 da. And then they were all chatting and then said, and it's really boring. And I just thought, I thought, okay, we'll take that. So anyway, that's what we saw. So they said it was really, really boring. So we kind of jigged it around a bit. And then we had this idea that actually, instead of talking to adults about teenagers, why don't we just say, right, you guys are all teenagers. We're all teenagers here together. Let's have a look at what's happening with the gut microbiome, what's happening with the brain. So I guess that's how we started. So, yeah. So, I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. And we wanted to focus, because we'd done a lot of research, you and I, on the gut-brain axis. And we just decided to do a little gut-brain module, which we haven't finished by any means, but it was really interesting research that we were both doing on this. And so it made sense to focus on the area of mental health in our teenagers. So that's why we decided to go for the gut brain. So, teenage mental health is something that's a little bit close to my heart right now, because I have a teenager. I have a 15-year-old, and I hear an awful lot about the problems that our teenagers have, and that's quite hard to hear. It makes me really worried about our teenagers. I'm also a GP, and I see an awful lot of teenagers with mental health problems. And I think since the pandemic, you and I would both agree that we think that's worsened. So we wanted to bring that to light. And that was certainly the case when we found the statistics. It's now 1 in 4 17 to 19-year-olds that actually have mental health disorders. And the peak age that we develop our mental health disorders is actually 14, which is pretty young. So this is an area that we thought we would look a little bit more into. And we also found that, self-harm is on the rise, and that our teenagers are actually super lonely.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that. Was that BBC Radio 4 survey, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. So according to that survey, 40% of our 16 to 24-year-olds are complaining that they're really lonely. That's in comparison to what I considered was the loneliest subgroup of people, which I thought the old age pensioners would be the loneliest. But only 27% of old age pensioners were complaining they were feeling lonely. So it's really sad, because you would expect teenagers to be in a family, have people around them. You wouldn't expect them to be on their own. So, why are they so lonely? What is it that's making them lonely? And that's worrying.
Isn't that interesting? Because if you think of the number of connections they have through social media, 50, 100, 400, whatever. I don't know how it all works. But, they're so connected in numbers. But there's a lot in lifestyle medicine about the effects of loneliness on your immune system, on your cancer risk, on your cardiovascular risk, early morbidity and also death. But it's really interesting that it has to be real life connection that releases all these positive chemicals, and this virtual connection doesn't seem to do it. In fact, a lot of it makes you feel more lonely, because you connect a bit and then you watch everyone else connecting, and everyone else is connecting more, bigger, better, smarter, more beautiful. It's constant comparison. And that did make me feel, I was surprised, and it made me feel sad. And actually, do you remember that book I was telling you about that I can't quite finish it because it's too, again, I've got sort of, older than your kids, but that you're struggling with anxiety and things. So the book was The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who's this professor from America who actually has come to the UK, and he's done a lot of research about children's play and the fact that they're not playing outside and they're not taking those risks in nature, and instead we're trying to protect them, but we're actually damaging them. So his big move at the moment is to ban social sort of smartphones until you're 16. So you can have your flick phone, so you can phone and say you're ready to be collected from school. But he says it's really, really damaging to the mental health. And apparently the UK are really on board. So it's going to be interesting. Some of you listening, if you've got kids out there, hopefully you'll kind of be hearing this through your schools. Actually, it's not the done thing now to allow your kids to be accessing, and hopefully parents out there, because I had this pressure, but we were the mums of the playground who said, we don't really want them to have phones, and everyone was going, oh yeah, but they'll be ostracized, they'll be teased by their peers, and so there was this uncertainty. But hopefully some of you listening now will know that you've got the evidence on board, and apparently parents are really on board as well. So hopefully we'll see that over the next year or two, that you parents out there will have that support, and you won't feel isolated as you try to make your kids do something which other kids aren't doing. But he thinks it's a big part of that, and that feeling of loneliness.
I would love it if that came in. But I have to say, the school that my kids go to, they insist that your child has a smartphone.
Wow. Okay.
Because in the classrooms, they're actively using their smartphones with their work. And so because it's a state school, my children don't go to private school, there isn't any funding or any money for other devices within the school. So, for example, if they're doing something that involves any kind of just using work jotters online, or just using their Google Classroom, they have to do it on their smartphone. So that's a major problem. And I do know in some private schools, they have banned smartphones successfully, but they've had the funding to be able to supply tablets to their children so that they can use their tablets in class. But that keeps them then off social media, which I think is a really, really useful thing. But I would be interested to know how this is going to be funded, and how you would get over that issue of children still needing to be able to access Google Classrooms as they're moving through their different subjects. So it's an interesting environment. It's an interesting conundrum right now for teachers, for kids, for parents. And, I struggle with it because I don't really want my kids to have smartphones, but without their smartphones, they can't navigate the normal school curriculum. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, because I heard him talk, he did a programme on Radio 4, and actually I recommend everyone sort of have a look. Jonathan Haidt will put some links in the show notes and listen to him, not to me. But anyway, this is kind of paraphrasing it. But there's a couple of things that really struck me about what he was saying. One was, we tend as parents to worry about the extremes, porn, cyberbullying. And he said, look, even if we took those things out and safeguarded kids against that, that's not the solution. Because the example was, say you had a girl who loved horses and she was just looking at horsey stuff all the time, their friends on horses and her on horses. It was all lovely. He said, that's still hours of her day looking on stuff, scrolling through stuff, comparing herself to other people, when they should be outside playing. They should be talking to each other. So that was really interesting, because I always go to, what are they watching? Is it going to be really frightening? And he's going, well, that is important, but there's a bigger thing than that. And he does a lot of, trying to introduce the sort of connections and outdoor play. And the other thing he was saying was, we try and protect our kids from these, fearful of people being abducted or our children being, attacked. Or he said, they're in their bedroom and you think they're safe, but actually they're entering this place, which he said was like a casino in your playground or in your bedroom. And you go into a casino, you don't know where they are, and they're in this place where people want to extract money and information from them, and you don't know who these people are, and you're letting them play there for hours. And no parent wants that, but that really struck me. I just felt really kind of wow,
absolutely.
really. So it's what's happening there, but it's also the hours spent in this casino means the hours that we spent maybe as kids, because we're getting on a bit now, but that kind of thing where you stayed outside and rode your bike to your mates and you got that physical activity and that, and also you got that thrill, you got that, jumping off that wall, diving into that, which would be considered dangerous, but it's nature's dangers and exploring, the world.
And I guess that's how you develop that bit of your brain, that bit that helps you with resilience as you age, isn't it? Because you have to do things and try things out for you to know whether you can actually tolerate or cope with it. And it's through all these actions that you develop confidence and you build all these different skills.
And relationships. Because, it's that eye contact, that raw relationship. And, there's a lot of learning amongst peers, and fairness and, rules that they learn that has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
And actually there is that justice system that kind of can work really, really well.
And if we think about it from a microbiome perspective, they're outside. They're hopefully outside and there's a wee bit of nature. There may not be much, but, it's some nature. They're also sharing some microbes between each other. Instead of being in the same room all the time, where they're not really going to be coming into contact with more diverse species and things that might enrich them in some way. So the more time in nature, the better. And actually, my kids are guilty of this as well. They spend far too much time in the house and not enough time outside, I think. And it is a really hard thing for our teenagers now, isn't it?
Yeah.
When the environment is very much geared towards spending more time inside on devices. And what my son will do these days is play his computer games with his friends, which is all very sociable, but they're all in separate houses.
Yeah.
Which I don't like. He argues that they are communicating and it's all good, but they're not actually having that face-to-face physical communication that, there's so much more you gain from that. So it is such a hard environment to navigate right now.
It is really difficult. But if we let's use this as an example. So we were arguing in our talk about the importance of the gut microbiome to teen mental health. So and, when we do any new subject, it is always a bit weird. How can bugs in your gut affect your teen mental health? And maybe we should just take the example I've just given. So, you've got your teenager in a bedroom, is scrolling through their stuff, and they get some really quite negative feedback about something. And you've got to remember at that age, what your peers say and shaming is brutal. It's like a physical attack on your body. So it's like being attacked by, a wild animal in the savannah in days gone by. So it's really stressful and brutal. So that kid is feeling extremely stressed, releasing stress hormones, cortisol levels go up. So how I'm going to ask you then, Sheena, because, so we're saying that kid is now really under attack, feeling stressed, a kid they're scared of, a bit of bullying, they've got to go into school tomorrow, this is something bad's happened. So I get that, but how can that social media impact the gut?
Well, I suppose if it was just a very short-term insult, everybody gets stressed, don't they? We can't think of stress in its own right as being really dangerous to us because everybody gets stressed from time to time. I suppose what I would worry about is not that occasional stress that we might get when we fall out with friends or, we something happens with one of our peer group, but more something that was happening more on a regular basis because it's chronic stress, I think, that is more damaging to our gut. You may get a little insult, which will cause some disruption of your gut microbiome through the high cortisol, the higher levels of inflammation, and that might knock some of the beneficial bacteria down in numbers, and it may increase the more harmful microorganisms a little bit, and that might have an impact on the way the gut works and how much of the very beneficial things like short chain fatty acids that your gut produces. But I think if that's only a short-term perturbation, you're only going to get a little bit of an insult, then it's going to recover and it's going to rebound and it's going to get back to normal again. But if you have that continual stress, so say somebody was being bullied and it was a more regular bullying that was happening to them, or they were just getting themselves extremely stressed with all the dopamine hits and the social media stress day to day, then that in itself is going to cause more damage long term, because you're not going to get the same rebound, and the function of your gut microbiome is going to be impaired. You're going to have less short chain fatty acids being produced, and eventually with stress, especially if it becomes more severe and more prolonged, you could risk dysbiosis of the gut, so a really unbalanced gut microbiome, and you could risk even some increased intestinal permeability or some leaky gut, whereby more of these harmful microorganisms that are building up in the gut and their toxins like lipopolysaccharide get into the bloodstream, and they can feed back to all the organs in the body. But if they travel up to the brain, then they can feed back to the brain and they can create inflammation within the brain. And that's really one of the hallmarks of mental health disorders, behavioral problems, mood problems. You've got some degree of inflammation going on there. And there's multiple reasons why you can get inflammation in the brain. So, a lack of short chain fatty acids coming from the gut is one reason why you might get more inflammation in the brain, because short chain fatty acids kind of act like a little hose. They hose down all the inflammation in and around the body. And so if we are always dampening the inflammation down with short chain fatty acids, then you're not going to get that buildup of inflammation and that damage in the brain. Whereas, if you have lots of toxins going into the bloodstream and they can actually create inflammation everywhere they go, that's going to create inflammation in the brain. And so that you need that balance to be struck. So not enough short chain fatty acids, too many of the harmful microorganisms, and suddenly you're in a situation where you've got too much inflammation all the time going on in the brain.
Yeah. I suppose traditionally with our NHS teaching and medical school teaching, it's very much sort of silos, isn't it? You go and do neurology and you do the digestive system, and then you go off and do, talk about the heart, and you're in the car, on the heart ward. And I suppose what people now see is this kind of systems model, but actually it's all one thing. Everything connects, everything chats, everything, there's crosstalk between all these cells, tissues and organs. And this is beautifully exemplified, I suppose, by the gut-brain axis. So the way we have kind of thought of it is you have these motorways, these main highways between the gut and the brain. So you've got your big vagus nerve, and then you've got the circulation. So those are your kind of main highways. And then you've got the what we call kind of chemical languages. So you get these little molecules that can travel via the vagus nerve or stimulate the vagus nerve or from the circulation. So your gut bugs are releasing lots of chemicals that act like little voices, little languages. So they might stimulate the immune system, produce cytokines, or they might stimulate your gut cells to produce gut hormones, or they might stimulate your enteric nervous system, and that will go on and stimulate to the vagus nerve. Or, as I know you've looked into this a bit more, that your gut microbes can produce neurotransmitters. So there's all these, the multilingual. I don't think we even know some of the chemicals. So they're all chatting to local tissues, or tissues further away, because they're traveling all around the body and acting almost like drug-like molecules. They're attaching to receptors all over the body and knocking on the door and saying, "Hi, this is happening. What do you want to do about it?" So, and the transmission between the vagus nerve, the gut, and the brain is really super fast, and the circulation's a bit slower. But I like that idea that these gut microbes are able to send messages up, and then they get messages sent back. And sometimes it's just, this is happening. Okay, no problem. But sometimes it's like, this is happening. It's an emergency. You need to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I suppose, the idea of inflammation being central to all these non-communicable chronic diseases, whether it's cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and as you say, neuroinflammation. Everyone seems to be, and the Lifestyle Medicine Conference, everyone comes back to inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction. Yes.
Mitochondrial dysfunction, metabolic stress, metabolic ill health. So absolutely, that is key to everything. And the metabolism of your gut microbiome is essential. So what we mean by that is is how is that community of microbes functioning? Is that community of microbes working together like a really productive city? Is it managing to take in all the good stuff and then produce and package all these wonderful nutrients, hormones, vitamins, all the best things that our body needs in order to provide really good physiological function all around the body? Because we can create all of these things in the gut. And then, is it managing to do all of this without allowing certain microorganisms or sectors of the population to take over and become too out of control? And so it's keeping that really tight balance. So you've got just enough of the bacteria that are producing the vitamins, and you've got just enough of the bacteria that are producing the hormones, and you've got just enough of the fungi that have their own role to play. And some of the bacteria that are keeping some of the pathogens at bay, they've all got a role. But when one population starts to become too powerful within that community, that's when things start to go haywire. And you'll end up with, one group of bacteria overtaking. And bacteria are interesting that, when they're in small numbers, they tend to be very productive and really beneficial. Like E. coli is a really good example of that. We normally think of E. coli as a pathogen, something that's harmful to us because it's normally what shows up on a urine sample when somebody's got a urine infection. But in actual fact, E. coli sits very happily in our gut, and it probably plays quite a vital role in defense. It probably keeps a lot of the harmful microbes at bay, and it's probably quite functional as well in producing some short chain fatty acids and various things. But if that bacteria is allowed to increase in number and it gets to a certain size of population, they start communicating very differently. And that's when they can start to produce toxins. And that's when they start to become a harmful population. And so that's just one example of what can happen in a dysbiotic gut, a gut where you've got an imbalance of microorganisms. So that's where you can end up with this chronic low-grade inflammation through an unbalanced population of microorganisms. And that's not just going to affect the gut, but it's going to impact on the gut wall. And if you manage to penetrate that gut wall through damaging the gut wall by that inflammation, then of course that inflammation can spill through into the circulatory system. And that can then spill through to all of the organs in the body because the circulation can take it there.
Yeah. So, you've got this group of, we've said teenagers, but actually, we're talking adolescents and all the way up to 30 because your brain continues to develop. And I suppose maybe we should just say something about that, because I hadn't really appreciated that, because when we were at medical schools, this idea that, your brain was kind of fully developed when, early childhood, and that was it. And that's certainly true for some parts of your brain. So, your coordination and motor skills and things, they do develop, optimize very quickly. But they've done these beautiful serial studies, MRIs of people as they age from 0 to 30. And they found that actually it didn't stop when you were a young child, that it continues to develop. And there were certain areas, particularly the prefrontal cortex is often pointed out, the front bit is a part of the brain at the front that's involved in your attention and impulse control and emotional instability, which is still quite still developing in teenage years. And it was I've just read quite a few pieces about this, because that idea is, they don't work properly, teenagers, their brains are poorly developed, they're under construction. And I really learned doing this talk that actually people are starting to say, well, what about if evolution isn't wrong? What about if actually it's meant to be like that? So that these kids are meant to be curious and breaking rules, pushing boundaries and exploring the environment. Otherwise, they just sit in the house and wouldn't move. Yeah. And so they're meant to be doing that. They're meant to not care what you think. They want to be out with their peers, their tribe. They want to find out what's out there today. Otherwise, they they'd be like with, phones sort of stuck to walls. I mean, it all changes in decades. They need to know what's out there today. And I love this idea that I was watching this lovely piece by this group of teenagers talking about this, and they met with a neuroscientist and they did this lovely poem, and they said, so wait a minute, our brains aren't broken, they're beautiful. And
exactly.
I thought, that was great. It's actually, they're not the problem. They're meant to go and explore the environment. And
they're probably meant to take risks.
Yeah.
Because that's probably how, as a society and as a community, it's probably how communities progress.
Yeah.
Because perhaps the teenagers were able to experiment more and come up with, more interesting ideas of things to try, things to do. They're more likely to try out things and do things that might seem a little bit crazier to the adults with that safety conscious mind.
Yes.
So it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
I mean, they can discover a lot, can't they, in their teenage years?
It did make me feel sad, because then you say, well, where's the problem? Well, the problem's the environment. They didn't make up social media. They didn't make up ultra-processed food. They didn't make up vapes, toxins, drugs. They didn't go, okay, let's have those. They're going out into the environment.
Yeah.
And we're the adults. We're meant to prepare this beautiful environment for these teens. And that made me feel really sad and quite responsible.
Yeah.
And we didn't, Sheena and I deliberately didn't want to make parents feel bad, or, we actually sort of took it upon ourselves, because actually Sheena and I, we're the adults. And it's that idea that, planetary health and this decimated planet. And I thought, whoa, that's really, I felt quite heavy. So that was kind of the gist of it. And I learned a lot from actually doing it. And then we sort of talked a bit about some of the lifestyle medicine conferences. So, we picked a couple of the lifestyle medicine pillars. So,
well, that's right, because lifestyle medicine is pertinent for this whole talk, really, because not only is it the pillars of lifestyle medicine, all of those lifestyle medicine pillars are highly important in terms of when they go wrong, that will determine the health of your gut microbiome. So when you're not sleeping, when you're eating the wrong foods, when you're not exercising, when you are under stress, when you don't have good relationships with the people around you, all of this will damage the gut microbiome, and it will create that dysbiosis. So our teenagers are at risk because they're at a time in their life where the pillars of lifestyle medicine are haywire, and they're more likely to go wrong because of the environment that they're living in, and that's making matters very difficult for them. And that is an issue. And when we consider, you and I just choose one of those pillars just to highlight it a little bit more, but just looking at sleep, for example, the sleep is vitally important for our whole system development, but in terms of the brain, it's vitally important as well. In fact, there isn't a single mental health disorder that doesn't worsen with sleep, and that's because circadian rhythms really are central to the health of all the cells and all the microorganisms, and every cell and microorganism needs a nice regular circadian rhythm. So disruption to that disrupts the health of the microbial species in the gut, and it prevents them from being as metabolically functional as they should, and it's going to favor the microorganisms that are more harmful, and the microorganisms that are beneficial to us are the ones that will suffer the greatest from that disruption. So that's a big problem. And Siobhan, you were looking at the impact of the teen diet.
Yeah, so I mean, it can sound like we're being a bit naggy, isn't it? The UK adolescents don't have enough fruit and veg. But actually, when you look at the stats, I mean, what was it, 70% don't have a single piece of fruit and veg a day? And your fibre, you've got to think what's feeding these incredible microbes. So they're not getting fruit and veg, they're not getting fibre. So they've got, they're taking less than half the recommended daily fibre intake. But again, that's not a fault thing. That's just the way it's kind of the food system looks at the moment. But then we were also talking about ultra-processed food. And obviously there's that very provocative book by Chris Van Tulleken, Ultra-Processed People. And obviously the Bite Back kids as well. I mean, they're talking about this ultra-processed food. It's high fat, high sugar. It's not got any fibre, so you haven't got any fibre to feed your microbes. And it's packed full of sweetness and emulsifiers. And it's this kind of, highly manufactured, for profit, fake food that's kind of lasts for a year without looking any different. And it's kind of, that's what I think it's 68% of our UK adolescents are. That's the diet is made up from this ultra processed food, which I found was pretty shocking, especially when I heard, I think it's the highest. We can't be higher than America, but I think it's the highest in Europe. Like, whoa, that's high. That's worrying. So, I mean, read Chris Van Tulleken's book. It's excellent. And there's lots of stuff recently published about the profound and, really strong associations between ultra-processed food and every health outcome you could mention, diabetes, cardiovascular, early death, I've said before. But actually, if we just sort of pull back a bit, because we were focusing on the gut microbiome, and it's just that your gut microbes, they hate this stuff because it's got no nutrients in for them. It's got no plant fiber, and it's got, nothing they can work on. So they're starving. But it's not just that. Not only are they starving, they are also then, it's kind of chemical warfare. These sweeteners and emulsifiers cause dysbiosis, wreck the ecosystem, wreck the mucus layer, damage the gut barrier. So you're getting leakage of these bacteria through into the gut, where you've got 70% of your immune cells and they're all reacting to these lipopolysaccharides that Sheena mentioned earlier. I'm just going to stop there, actually, because those lipopolysaccharides are a bit of a long word. So it's LPS. And LPS is a molecule found on the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria. And there's lots of gram-negative bacteria in your gut microbiome. And if they sit outside in the luminal side of your gut, and they're not inside your body, that's fine. It's like a good neighbour thing. You don't mind your neighbours being next door, but you don't want them all coming into your house and sleeping in your bed and eating all your food. So good neighbours, they need that garden fence. But when you do get that barrier breakdown and you get these fragments of these bacteria or whole bacteria coming through, and they've got this LPS on the outside, your body's immune system in the gut recognizes that as a serious problem. So that LPS is a potent activator of the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So that's all these immune cells in the gut.
And it's worth mentioning that obviously these poor diets lead to a greater number of these gram-negative bacteria in the gut. So, of course, you get much more of the breakdown product, much more LPS. So there are some bacteria that like this food, but it's not the beneficial ones that we want in there. And these ones are harmful to us when they break down. And of course, a gut bacteria only lasts about 10 hours. That's its lifespan. So, of course, bacteria are breaking down all the time. And we should be able to get rid of the breakdown products of their cell walls and metabolize them and get rid of them. But this LPS is quite toxic.
I think you make a really good point there. Okay, so when we're communicating this, there's lots of narratives. We learn in narratives and pictures. And I think we and other people in this area can be criticised, I suppose, for making it too good cop, bad cop, too simplistic. But then, that's education psychology. You've got to hook on to things that you already understand. I mean, I find this very complex. But I think you made a really good point there, this idea of your good bugs and your bad bugs. First of all, the point you made, that it's an ecosystem. So that in balance, everyone gets on well. But if you get one group that are getting an advantage, then there can start to be problems. So they're not bad until they sort of explode in numbers. And secondly, that what we consider bad, because we want the survival of us, Homo sapiens, actually, for those gram-negative bacteria, it's survival of the fittest. So, if their ecosystem is expanding, and that's when you get this, they're producing these chemicals that are messaging your brain to increase cravings, and you're getting this whole, it's part of this idea that these ultra-processed foods are addictive. You're getting all this crosstalk and messaging and triggering of these appetite centers in your brain. You're getting this almost drug-like craving for these foods. Then arguably that gut microbiome is doing very nicely, thank you. It's interesting, isn't it, what we consider a successful ecosystem. Actually, for those potentially pathogenic bugs, they're like, it's all going just fine. So that is interesting. But so then we just, there was that paper that you sent me, which I was a bit kind of flabbergasted at, because we were talking about mental health, we were talking about children and adolescents, and I didn't really, when you think about non-communicable non-communicable chronic diseases. I always think of older people
adults
with heart attacks. You don't think, oh, what's the burden of these on children and adolescents? But actually, the Global Burden of Disease, it's 2022 publication, and it's sort of saying that children and adolescents are really struggling with these diseases, not just the mental health stuff, but musculoskeletal diseases and respiratory diseases and dermatological diseases. You know, they are really struggling. And then you sent me that picture that the UK children and adolescents, out of everyone in Europe, they've got the shouldering the biggest burden of these non-communicable diseases. I was pretty shocked. I mean, out of everyone in Europe.
I know. Why are we always top of the charts in Europe for the worst things?
The highest ultra-processed food. I mean, there's got to be a connection, isn't it? The highest ultra-processed food. And you just, because we're always looking at America going, oh, look, they've got the highest rates of this. We are like,
we're pretty
inches
close.
behind.
We are pretty close because I think their teenagers have over 70% of their diet is ultra processed. We're sitting about 68% now.
Yeah, I think it's 68%. It's unfairly divided. So I think the average recently, because I did another meta-analysis, the average is about 66%. In higher socioeconomic groups, it's 63, which is still terrible. And in the most deprived areas where they've got these food deserts, and we are just, it's so unfair. So we're just piling, you know, one insult after another onto the people who are the most vulnerable. And, you know, it's, again, it hits them hardest, always.
Absolutely. So I think that's the important message, that whilst we concentrated on the mental health side of things, and mental health is certainly related to poor gut health, of course, affects all systems of the body, and all communicable diseases start off really with or are associated with poor gut health. So yes, it's not surprising, as the biggest consumers of ultra-processed foods and also having pretty unhealthy lifestyles in Europe in comparison to a lot of our European neighbours, that we're doing so badly on that front. But still pretty chilling and, pretty concerning.
Certainly a wake-up call for me. I did not know that, and I didn't quite. I was pretty. But I mean, the thing is about these conferences, I mean, you could just like pour bad news onto an audience. So, we then have to sort of step back. And this is the bit I love about this conference, because the solution is the same whether you're talking about diabetes, cardiovascular disease, mental health disorders, you know.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It comes back to the lifestyles of the pillars of lifestyle medicine, to healthy eating, to physical activity, to managing your stress, to avoiding risky substances, to sleeping well, and to relationships. But that's all very well, Siobhan. It's how we get that message to our teenagers. And I have to say, that's where that Bite Back really inspired me, because Bite Back being driven by the teenagers really, I think, is an ideal solution to the ultra-processed food issue that we have right now, because if they drive it, then it will happen. If it's being driven by adults, it's much harder. And whilst as lifestyle medics, you know, we're keen to coach our teenagers into having a healthy lifestyle. Obviously, as GPs, we're time constrained in how much time we have for coaching, and you know, we've got a difficult environment to navigate with them. And we need parental involvement. We need parental help.
Yeah.
So, what are your tips? How do you manage that in practice?
So I'm going to go further upstream. So as you know, British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, it starts with kind of, political systems, health inequalities upstream, because why are our young people having to even navigate these obstacles? I mean, why are they having to decide what they should eat? And why are they having to step over stuff that will cause them disease? I mean, it shouldn't be there. What's happening in the species where we sort of, our environment is flooded with this? So I suppose, I know that you feel the same, that it is no one's fault. Actually, it isn't even their responsibility, because, we should be looking after ourselves and having, beautiful food, beautiful environment. It's just that we're in such a sort of terrible place at the moment. That's why we're having to tell people, look, while they try and sort it out upstream. These are the kind of, the things that might help you, but they shouldn't have to do that. The food in school should be beautiful, should be making their brains, sing and work well. Their environment should be right. That's what they should have. And yet we're giving them all these kind of, for me, I think I'm looking at institutions. I think I'm going to really focus on schools, but schools, hospitals. We've got to clean up our own backyard.
Absolutely.
So hospitals, schools, prisons. We've got to treat, government institutions where, all this money is pouring in, taxpayers' money. You want to be using that money to, feed, but also nourish the next, generation of, workers and, for economical reasons.
Absolutely.
Anything else, but.
And the things that we can do as a community, if we want our schools to be better, a better environment for our children, to have, less impact on their health in a really bad way, then that starts with getting involved with your school council, considering going into the school, meeting with the school, finding out what education they deliver. And, I've been into schools, I've been into my kids' schools, I've given talks on sleep in my kids' school. I've actually been involved in some education there, but maybe I need to do more. Maybe I need to go back there and see if there is anything else educational wise I can deliver to them. And I know actually I was talking to some lovely Scottish lifestyle medics last night when I was out for dinner with them. And actually that's exactly what they were going to be doing on the back of this conference, is going into their local schools and finding out if they needed some education on lifestyle that they can deliver to the teenagers and the kids in school, so that they can help to give more resources to these kids. And again, they were going to deliver the information on Bite Back. And, there are lots of interesting organizations out there that might be able to help. The sleep charity has a lot of interesting information on sleep. I don't know whether all parents are aware of the kind of resources they can access with their teenagers. So that, there's going to be a whole load of resources out there that schools could potentially get education out to their pupils on. So yeah, I think we could all be more involved in the community and more involved in this type of education. So that's one way we could try and think about moving things in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that the hopeful thing, though, is that, these changes will help everyone in every way. So it won't just help our teenagers, it will help the elderly population, it will reduce, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So although it sort of seems quite a complex model that we've got to kind of go upstream, look at health inequalities, work on these, lifestyle pillars, have more open, green spaces in urban places and get people connecting and talking, reducing, toxic substances, improving people's sort of sleep patterns. And it's all doable. And it's all, wonderful, doable, available stuff. It's not complex.
Absolutely.
It's not easy, but it's not complex interventions, and they've got side effects. They've only got positive effects.
And there are some incredible examples around the world of schools that teach their children about food, for example. Look at French schools. French schools traditionally have a long break for lunch where they actually educate the children about the lunch. The children are often involved in creating the lunch as well. And that's a big part of their education. Food is very important to the French. And it's the same if you go to some of the Asian countries like Japan, where they educate children really well on food, and the children there know that they have to have their vegetables on their plate and their fruits, and they learn how to balance nutrition at a really young age, which I think is incredible. And we don't really give our children good education on food. In fact, one of my children, I remember she had a home economics lesson, and her home economics lesson was learning how to read a processed pizza label and work out how to cook up an ultra-processed pizza. And I thought, my God, what are we teaching our children here? This isn't a life skill that I need my kids to learn. I need them to learn how to create that pizza from scratch, not how to put an oven-ready pizza into an oven for the right amount of time. So, can we take that education back a bit? Can we start, teaching people how to cook the most basic things, the type of cooking that's economical, that's going to be cheap, nourishing, how to make a bone broth and how to create a soup from scratch, or having to, or being able to, make a roast dinner or a stew, something that's going to be nourishing and wholesome and, contain lots of vegetables, and teach them how to balance their plate so that they don't have, all carbohydrates on there, and, get them to understand more about different varieties of foods so that they're not scared of foods, of different ingredients, so that they can navigate their way around the grocery section in the local supermarket and be able to understand what's in season, what's good, and how to cook those different things. That would be my ideal. I would love to see that in schools. I would love to see that kind of education.
Yeah. So anyone out there listening, because often when you talk about the gut microbiome, people go, okay, how do we manipulate the gut microbiome? And people go on to fecal microbiota transplants or prebiotics or probiotics, and which one shall I take? We're not saying that those things don't have a place, but, honestly, this is like the biggest way on behalf of your gut bugs. Okay. This is what they want to hear. They want variety, diversity of fruit and veg, 30 different types of fruit, veg, nuts a week. They want you out in the garden. They want you. So this is all stuff that you guys listening can do already. There'll be people who love gardening or who love cooking or who love taking their grandchildren just for a walk, kick around, leaves in autumn in nature. That's what these solutions look like.
And they need love.
Yeah. Connecting to nature. They do, because that alters, lovely data on what love and release of oxytocin, serotonin, all these kind of, positive chemicals. Again, they hum down and
feeling
really,
safe.
Yeah.
That talk today.
Yes.
Children,
Dr. Bird, yeah.
Children need to feel safe. Yeah. And if they feel safe in their environment, they don't produce all the stress hormones.
Yeah.
And they then don't suffer from as much disease later on in life.
Yeah, so it's all these tiny things that you can do. So don't go to the drugs cabinet. Don't go and buy anything expensive. Just do simple, small things in your local community. Seek out those green spaces. Find a friend who's got some potatoes that they're growing in their garden, some veg, veg patches, cooking from scratch, really simple things with your grandchildren. This is where the answers are. That does everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know about you, but Lifestyle Medicine Conference is actually making me feel quite hopeful. Although our talk, I have to say, frightened me a little bit in terms of our teenage health, I'm now feeling more confident. I'm feeling more hopeful for the future. I'm feeling more positive because of the people that are at this conference that have come from far and wide, they're all bought into this. They all understand it, and they're all desperate to make a difference to their community. And I think that's the message I would like to give.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we should just sign off there, and we are going to go and get ready because it's a nice gala dinner tonight. So we're going to meet with these lovely people, and so we're going to say goodbye now.
Thanks for listening, guys. Bye.